Hello and welcome to this edition of Upfront. I'm your host, Nancy Wilmot. And I talk to a lot of people in this community every week, and it doesn't seem to take very long before one topic comes up. This isn't the town where I grew up. What has happened to Port Alberni? We never used to have this many people without homes. We never used to have so many drug users on the street. And what's with all the petty crime? Well, you know what? They're right. It's not the same town as it was when they grew up, but it's not unique to Port Alberni. This situation is facing cities and towns across British Columbia, across North America for that matter. It's one of the reasons why I'm really happy to welcome today's guest, someone who can speak to this issue with some authority. Very pleased to introduce Mr. Ron Merk of the Port Alberni C.A.T team. That's the Port Alberni Community Action Team. Ron, welcome to Upfront.
Hi, Nancy, and thank you.
Now, I will wager that many of the people watching this show, Ron, have never heard of C.A.T before. What is it?
Yeah, Community Action Team was, they were created by, funded by the provincial government about a year after the declaration of the health emergency for the poison drug crisis in British Columbia. So around 2017. In Port Alberni, we were one of the first original 6 that were created. Sadly, we were one of the first 6 because of the rate of deaths we have from the poison drug crisis in Port Alberni. So they felt it was necessary to create our community action team right out of the gate. They're now about 33 or approximately 33 in the province.
Wow. Wow. Now, I want to catch something because you called it the poison drug crisis. This was originally called the overdose crisis, was it not?
Yeah, people have used different terminology, and of course we're evolving the language. And part of the reason for evolving the language, of course, is to stop stigmatizing people who use substances. However, it's more accurate to refer to it as a poison drug crisis. It's not really an overdose crisis per se. And I say that for the following reason. So if the drugs were pure and people knew the dose that was in a particular substance they were using, they would not overdose. So what we really have is a supply that's unregulated and is poisoned with all kinds of substances, and that's why it's a poison drug crisis.
Okay, there's all sorts of questions about what you just said, and we're going to talk about them. But first, I want to know who sits on C.A.T. Who makes up this team?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. So we have just about anybody that would be interested and involved in the overdose crisis, or pardon me, the poison drug crisis in Port Alberni sits on the committee. And so our table is wide ranging. So we have service groups, for instance, we would have the Bread of Life there, Salvation Army, the Friendship Center. We have First Nations, C.A.T and Hupechasat sit at the table. We have Island Health people and other health people that are involved, for instance, the overdose prevention site. And also we have peers. Peers from all walks of life and people that are currently or have in the past used substances. So they sit there on the table with us so they can provide their voice, making sure that everybody understands what it's like when you are faced with the challenges of using a substance.
How often do you meet? What do you do?
We meet monthly. There's a lot of stuff goes on, of course, in between the meetings. Our next meeting, as a matter of fact, is tomorrow, 12:30, and we meet. It's kind of a hybrid meeting process. So we have people that join us on Zoom, but we also meet in the new public safety building on 3rd Avenue, compliments of the city of Port Alberni.
Nice. And the next question I think is fairly self-evident, but why should the larger community care that C.A.T is taking? Why should we care?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Nancy. And so it's interesting you asked that question because I just read a study this week, and it said that in British Columbia, 1 in 5 people knows died or has or used substances. That's 1 in 5 people. 20% of the population of British Columbia knows somebody that's passed away from a poison drug overdose.
Wow.
So that right there would say it all, and it affects all of us. So I would say, you know, you may not think it affects you, but it does affect you because you know there's a vast amount of money and resources that we're trying to that we are using to try and mitigate all of the fallout from the poison drugs that are out there in the street. It affects our health system as people use the emergency room or other health facilities. You know, so there's lots of reasons why it impacts everybody.
Yeah. And you mentioned the provincial health emergency being declared in 2016, 2017. I can't quite remember, but the
2016.
numbers haven't. 2016 numbers have not gone down since then, have they?
No, no. And so I'm glad you asked about the numbers. So since 2016, there's been over 12,000 British Columbians that have passed away from the poison drug crisis. You know, that's more than, it's somewhere between 6 and 7 people every day. And it's not abating. So sadly, although, you know, we are trying all kinds of methods and procedures and changing policies, we still haven't found, you know, the magic group of them that is making a significant dent. So as a matter of fact, I think as of, I'm going to say the end of April, we've had 11 deaths in the Alberni Clayoquot area. We had 28 last year. So I'm expecting the numbers will be similar this year. So that's families, friends, neighbors. Yeah.
And I know I've been surprised by the statistic of who it is that's dying. This is affecting everybody. This isn't just for one specific group. This is across the demographics.
Yeah, you know, there's some really, you know, big misconceptions. You know, the tendency is that people they kind of see the more visible marginalized people that have the lowest ebb of the whole mess between concurrent or disorders. So I'll just mention as an example, 70% of people that have substance disorders also have concurrent mental health disorders. And when you put the two together and you realize that 70% of the people that use substances also have mental health challenges, you understand why many of them end up marginalized, and we see them visibly on the street as an example. However, the biggest population that we see there is impacted by substance or poison drug crisis is not the people we actually see on the streets. It's more likely to be a man. It's more likely to be a man that's between the ages of 20 and 55, and he's more likely to die in a single family residence. So when you put that together, you know, we're really talking about, often it can be somebody that's decided to use drugs recreationally and didn't know what was in the particular substance they bought. It's likely to be a family man with a husband, family, and, you know, husband and wife and family. And it's likely that he ends up using it on a Friday or Saturday night after work. And then sadly, the poisons that are in whatever he used, they overdose because they do it alone. So if I was going to say one message to people, I would say, don't ever do drugs alone. And there's apps that you can use, for instance, Lifeguard, the Brave app and stuff. You can find those online and you can download them to your phone. So it's not who we think it is. I'm not saying that marginalized people aren't affected. However, the interesting part about marginalized community out there is they're more likely to look after each other. They're more likely to have naloxone with them. They're more likely to do it in locations where there's other people around, so people can apply life-saving techniques if they overdose.
Naloxone kits are available, I believe, from emergency services, are they? You can ask for naloxone kits. I know the fire department did have them available if you requested them.
Yeah, so you can actually almost probably find them in some of the larger drugstores. For instance, I think Shoppers Drug Mart has them. You can certainly find them at the OPS, the Overdose Prevention Site, which is down on 3rd Avenue and Butte, I believe it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of places where you can pick up an naloxone kit.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
great little instructions that come with the kits. So if you just spend like 5 minutes and read the instructions, you'll be up on board and you'll be ready in case you have to use it.
I want to go back to my opening statement that people say, this isn't the town I grew up in. It's not. Why is this happening now, Ron? What is so different about the drug supply today?
Well, first of all, I thought I would never say this, but I actually kind of pine for the time when we only had heroin available. Because heroin, it didn't do the kind of stuff that we're seeing now. But now we have all of these synthetic opiates. The biggest problem we have is the opiate type of drugs. Although there's other drugs, cocaine, meth, amphetamines, and et cetera, and they all play a part in this. However, the opiates are usually filled with fentanyl. And also, there's some other drugs that are cropping up lately, which are not. Naloxone doesn't counteract these other drugs that are being put into the fentanyl. So the suppliers are putting in drugs like benzodiazepines and xylazine. Xylazine, as an example, is a horse or cow tranquilizer, and these are not reversed by naloxone. So potentially. You could see somebody that overdoses and they don't respond to naloxone. So it's really important to call 911 as soon as possible. But to go back to your question, the biggest problem we have is the synthetic opiates that have come onto the market. They're incredibly powerful, unbelievably powerful, hundreds of times more powerful than heroin was, say, back in the 1990s or 1980s. And of course, these other drugs that are being now put into the supply. And there's all kinds of poisons and other additives that are put in, everything from cornstarch to baking soda, everything to cut it. So it's unregulated. It's an illicit drug supply. And for that reason, you have no idea what's in it.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the C.A.T team. You've got this great group of people, very diverse group, very involved group. What can you do? You don't have a lot of authority that I can see.
No, so we have 4 really key pillars to our terms of reference that we work with, and one of the biggest ones is networking all of the community together. So that's one of the biggest principles that we have at the Community Action Team table is we have all the players at the table. We network, and by networking I mean so one group will say, "Hey, we're doing this month," and the other groups will go, "Oh, that's great. Can we piggyback off of that?" And so that's very powerful to be able to pull everybody together and hear what other groups are doing, so that other people can leverage the same things. Yeah. The other 3 pillars are promoting harm reduction. So when we talk about depenalizing people for personal supply, or we talk about regulating a supply so that it's regulated by the provincial government and we know exactly what's in it. So that's harm reduction, things like providing syringes, all of those kind of things. They keep people alive until they're ready to get into a treatment program. The third pillar would be reducing stigma, and that's part of the language we're talking about here. But reducing stigma is a big part, because stigmatized people, they don't reach out for help. They feel guilty, they feel marginalized, and so anything we can do in the community to make people understand that this is a health emergency, it isn't a moral deficiency, that reduces stigma. And then the final thing, of course, is that we concentrate on the social issues that drive the whole poison drug crisis behind the scenes, and that's incredibly important, because we're not going to solve it strictly by things like decriminalizing or depenalizing people for personal possession. And we're not going to solve it by providing a regulated or a safer supply. There's a whole pile of social issues in behind this, and that includes poverty. It includes reconciliation with First Nations people, because frankly, First Nations people are way represented in the poison drug crisis. It includes housing. People don't start the healing journey unless they have a safe place to put their head every night. So we have all these, and then we have access to services, recovery centers, detox centers. So as an example today, if you were to go to the ER and you say, "Hey, I'm ready. I wanna heal," you're going to get a referral. You'll be sent to the mental health and substance services people on Roger Street. Probably will get to see somebody in 3 to 4 weeks, and then maybe they'll recommend that you start some sort of recovery program. Best in class countries, that is measured in hours. It's not measured in days or weeks. It's measured in hours. So best in class countries that have addressed this crisis, for instance, Portugal or Switzerland, Germany. There's a host of countries that have stepped through this, and Portugal, they have a process that refers to dissuasion committee. So if you found that you have a substance disorder, you go to the dissuasion committee. That dissuasion committee will sit down with you and figure out the best plan for you. And if you choose and say, "I'm ready for recovery," they're gonna sit you in the chair, and within 2 hours, you're gonna be, somebody's gonna step up and say, "Come with me," and we're gonna start your journey. And so till we get to that place in British Columbia, it's impossible for somebody who is addicted to a substance, particularly an opiate, to hold out for 3 weeks waiting for somebody for a referral. It needs to be as instant or as immediate as we can make it. So these are the social things that are in behind the crisis that are driving the fact that we don't have, we're not seeing decreased numbers.
Yeah. There is so much going on. There are so many moving parts to all of this, but I'm going to hone in onto harm reduction, because that is, when you talk about harm reduction, you will get a whole spectrum of responses from people saying, "Well, you're just enabling them, you're letting people party on your dime," to saying, "No, we're keeping them alive." Does harm reduction work? And explain harm reduction. You've partly explained it, but explain what the reasoning behind harm reduction is. Is it just letting people party until we can get them into a treatment center?
No, of course not. Harm reduction, first of all, it's an evidence-based process. And by evidence-based, I mean there's been a ton of research done since the 1990s. So, we've got like decades now of research around harm reduction across the world. And all the research that says the same thing. So, harm reduction, it keeps people alive. It prevents death. It also protects the public. I want to emphasize that. So, for instance, I will mention the AIDS epidemic we had. And one of the things that we have implemented with the AIDS epidemic is clean needle supplies for people and a whole host of other things. And that was to prevent the spread of AIDS between people. And that harm reduction significantly reduced the spread of AIDS. So the same principles apply to the poison drug crisis. So the intent of any harm reduction policy that we implement around the poison drug crisis is intended to keep people alive, but it also protects, for instance, the general public. So, for instance, if we have a clean needle program in the overdose prevention site, what that does is prevent the spread of things like AIDS, because that's still out in the population, but we also have some other very virulent diseases that are spread between people that use needles, and that can spread to the general population. So anything we do in harm reduction doesn't just protect the people that may have substance disorders, it also protects the rest of us. Okay, so there's a lot going on with harm reduction, and as I said, the science, the evidence base tells us it works, and it works very effectively. So the more we do around harm reduction, the more we keep people alive, the healthier we keep them until they reach the point where they're able to make that decision and say, "I need to heal. I want to be healed." And then, we put them into a recovery process and we start that journey for them. And, so every person we lose is a horrible calamity for the greater community, but certainly for family and friends of that person. So harm reduction is meant to stave off that calamity until we have the right pieces in.
Yeah. Yeah. And earlier on, you mentioned 2 apps that are part of harm reduction. Could you tell me more about those apps?
Yeah, so there's 2 great apps. Brave app again, I mentioned those, and also a Lifeguard. And there's also a 1-800 number, and it's called NORS, N-O-R-S. So if a person was to do a Google search for NORS, it would come up. And same with the Brave app or the Lifeguard app. So we'll talk about the apps for a second. So these you could download on your phone, and what happens is once you have the app on your phone and you decide that you're going to use a substance, maybe you're in your man cave on Friday night and you're just kicking back, and it's been a stressful week, and you've just decided that you need something, and that's what you're going to do. You can dial up the Brave app or get the Brave app up, and the Brave app will monitor you for the first 20 to 30 minutes after you've taken the substance. If it feels that you're not moving around, it will notify the appropriate emergency response and send them to your house.
Wow.
Yeah. You can even designate in the app. You can say, if I'm not moving around, call this number because my wife will be there and she'll answer. Now, your wife may never know that you've been using, but that's okay. This time when you've decided and you happen to overdose, this will be the time she'll find out. But hopefully she'll run down to the man cave and save you.
Wow.
So that's what Brave app and the Lifeguard app do. NORS is even cooler because what happens with NORS, you phone a 1-800 number, and these are all privacy sensitive. So there's no concern about is anybody gonna phone somebody else and say, hey, you know what? Guess what? So and so is, they're very careful about that. But NORS is a 1-800 number. You're talking to a live person. They'll stay on the phone with you until they know and you feel you're okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
This seems to me like harm reduction in one of the most direct ways for somebody who perhaps isn't visiting the safe injection site, is using Home Alone. I had never heard of these before we talked, Ron.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty
and
amazing.
One of the other harm reductions, we're really pushing hard on it because in the last year or so we've implemented drug checking. So drug checking is very cool, and so you can you can either go physically to the OPS if you're in Port Alberni. There's even a mail-in process, and there's other ways to get your drug tested once you link into it. They put a little tiny sample of your drug into a special machine that analyzes the drug completely. It'll tell you exactly what's in it and what strength everything is, so you know exactly what you're getting and what you're taking. And that's available free of charge, and it's of course a privacy thing too, and it's kept very confidential. And there's some very cool, nice people that interface with you, and they're all on your side if you happen to be a person using substances, and they'll help you. Yeah.
Ron, we're getting close to the end of this conversation. There's so much more to talk about, but I am guessing that the majority of people watching this are learning something every 2 minutes as you're talking about what is going on in our community and why things are the way they are. How can those people get involved? How can they find out more and be part of the solution?
Well, I'm hoping you'll put it up on the video when you finalized it. But we have a website. We also have a Facebook page. You can interface with all of those. You can send us an email at portcat at gmail.com. So ptcat@gmail.com.
Wow. And the CAT meetings, is the public welcome to attend, or just the CAT members, or do you ever have public meetings?
They're not private per se, but we prefer that people are invited and ask, and so that we can make sure you're up to speed on everything around the protocols and everything we do at the table, because respect is a big deal for us. And everybody's voice is heard, and we don't allow disrespect, so it's important to make sure everybody is on the same page before we allow them to come into the meetings.
how optimistic are you about this situation, Ron? I mean, it seems to be just getting worse, not necessarily getting better. How do you feel about the future?
I think a lot of it is in the provincial government's hands. I'm hoping that they're courageous enough to make some of the choices that need to be done. I will say that sometimes it feels like I'm pushing a rock up a steep mountain. But I believe in the starfish principle story, and if you've heard that, you know what it is. And basically, it's every starfish that you can throw back into the ocean that have been washed up on the beach, it saves them, and there might be a lot more still on the beach. However, we do this one at a time. So
Wow.
That's where I'm at.
You know what, Ron, that's a wonderful story to end things on. I'm hoping you'll come back and chat with me again, maybe later in the year, because there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love that. Just anytime, just reach out.
Yeah. Ron Merk, thank you so much for joining me here today. And to all you watching at home, thank you for joining us both on this edition of Upfront.